"I'm growing old like the trees in the forest," she used to say with a serene smile. "But like them, I hope my roots will continue to nourish new life long after I'm gone." It was a prophecy that would be fulfilled in ways she could never have imagined. The sky on that October morning in 1859 held a different kind of light over the dense Wisconsin forests. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the treetops, casting golden beams that touched the damp forest floor like divine fingers. Adele Brise, a 28-year-old Belgian woman, walked a familiar trail between pines and oaks, carrying a small bag of provisions. The crisp autumn air of the American Midwest filled her lungs as she made her way toward her parents' home, immigrants like herself who had left Belgium in search of a new life in the promising lands of America. Dry leaves crackled beneath her feet, composing a melody that blended with the distant song of birds. In those days, European settlers faced long, hard days of work, trying to build a future in a land as beautiful as it was unforgiving. Faith was the backbone of those determined souls, and Adele was no exception. She carried a deep devotion in her heart, passed down through generations of devout Catholics. Suddenly, a strange silence fell over the forest. The birds stopped singing, the breeze stilled. It was as if all of nature held its breath for a moment. Between two towering trees, Adele saw a luminous figure, a woman of indescribable beauty, dressed in radiant white, with a yellow sash around her waist and a crown of 12 stars atop her head. The light that shone from her did not hurt the eyes, but instead warmed the soul like the first sunlight after a long winter. Adele felt her knees weaken as she sank to the leaf-covered ground. Her heart pounded, and her eyes couldn't look away from the vision, as if it had emerged from a heavenly dream. The figure simply smiled and disappeared, leaving the young immigrant in a state of awe and reverence. What could this vision mean? Could it have been an illusion, a trick of sunlight filtered through the trees? It wasn't. A few days later, on Sunday, October 9th, as she walked to Mass with two companions, Adele saw the same luminous apparition once again. This time, encouraged by her friends, who saw nothing but sunlight through the trees, she approached the heavenly figure. The Lady of Light smiled once more, but remained silent, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal her purpose. It was during the third appearance that the mystery began to unfold. The radiant lady finally spoke, with a voice that sounded like crystal clear water flowing over smooth stones. "I am the Queen of Heaven, who prays for the conversion of sinners." Her words were more than sound. They were vibrations in the very air, touching Adele's heart like a divine melody. "And you," the Queen of Heaven continued, "you received Holy Communion this morning, and that is good. But you must do more. Make a general confession and offer communion for the conversion of sinners." Every word she spoke felt like a beam of light piercing the soul of the young Belgian woman, awakening a purpose she had never known before. "Gather the children of this wild country and teach them what they need to know for their salvation." The mission became as clear as fresh spring water. Teach them the catechism, how to make the sign of the cross, and how to approach the sacraments. If you do not, you will be held accountable before God. The wind returned, rustling through the trees as if heaven itself had sighed. Leaves danced around the apparition, who now began to rise gently like a white cloud carried on the morning breeze. "Go and fear nothing. I will help you," were her final words before she vanished completely, leaving behind a soft scent of roses. Even in that autumn forest where no flowers bloomed, that moment, in that freshly settled patch of American land, marked the beginning of a journey of faith and devotion that would transcend generations. Wisconsin, in the mid-19th century, was still frontier territory, where European settlers faced brutal winters, scorching summers, and the many challenges of building a new life far from everything they had ever known. Most had arrived with little more than their material belongings, but they carried an invaluable treasure in their hearts, their faith. In the hardships of pioneer life, where every day was a battle for survival and every harvest meant the difference between plenty and hunger, the message brought by the Queen of Heaven echoed like a beacon of hope. For Adele, a simple immigrant who barely spoke English, the call to teach the catechism to local children felt like an impossible mountain to climb. The nights in those rustic cabins were long and dark. By the flickering light of candles, Adele pondered the calling she had received. How could she, with no possessions, no formal education and no resources, fulfill such a mission? Her humble room, with rough wooden walls that let in the biting autumn wind through narrow cracks, became a sanctuary of prayer. The wide wooden floor creaked beneath her knees as she knelt in supplication, asking for strength and guidance. The stars shone like diamonds scattered across the black velvet sky of Wisconsin, silent witnesses to her devotion. The scent of pine drifted in through the window, mingling with the smell of melting wax. In those quiet hours of intimate communion with the divine, Adele felt the invisible embrace of the one who had entrusted her with a sacred mission. It was as if Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception herself whispered in her ear, "Courage, my daughter. I walk with you." And so began an extraordinary journey. Moved by an unshakable faith, Adele began her catechetical mission. She traveled from house to house, walking long distances on foot, through dense forests and open fields, under the scorching summer sun, or braving the relentless winter snowstorms. Her simple dress, faded by use and time, became her battle uniform in a spiritual war for the hearts and minds of the children in that wild land. With a heart full of determination, Adele Brise dedicated her life to the mission entrusted to her by the Virgin Mary. Her work began humbly, visiting scattered families throughout the Wisconsin countryside, often walking over 50 miles a week to teach catechism. The children, sons and daughters of settlers from many different nations, welcomed her with curious eyes. With infinite patience, she taught them how to make the sign of the cross, how to pray the rosary, and how to understand the foundations of the Catholic faith. Calloused hands can also draw the path to heaven, Adele would tell the exhausted mothers, encouraging them to pass on the faith amid their daily chores. Her dedication soon grew into something far greater than she had ever imagined. With the help of a few devoted believers, she built a small wooden school near the site of the apparition. It was a modest structure, with walls barely strong enough to keep out the freezing winter wind, but it became a beacon of faith for the entire region. In 1861, just 2 years after the apparitions, a devastating fire threatened to consume the entire forested area surrounding Adele's chapel and school. The desperate settlers gathered to pray around the sacred grounds, carrying a statue of the Virgin Mary in a solemn procession around the property. As the flames devoured everything in their path, something inexplicable happened. The fire completely bypassed the chapel grounds, as if an invisible hand had drawn a protective line around it. This would be the first of many events considered miraculous at the site. Adele, whose health had always been fragile, found supernatural strength for her mission. "When my feet bleed on the rocky paths," she once confided to a companion, "I feel as though I'm walking on rose petals scattered by Our Lady." Her life became a living testimony of self-giving and love, drawing other women to her side who, inspired by her example, joined her to form a small congregation dedicated to teaching and prayer. News of the seer from Wisconsin and her tireless work spread quickly. Pilgrims began arriving from far and wide, many of them ill, seeking physical and spiritual healing. Among them was Thomas Lambert, a man who had been blind for over 20 years. He had traveled from Chicago after dreaming of a lady in white who called him to Wisconsin. After drinking water from a spring near the chapel and spending a night in prayer, Thomas woke the next morning with partial vision restored. enough to distinguish shapes and colors, an improvement no doctor could explain. In 1871, when a terrible scarlet fever epidemic swept through the American Midwest, families who had followed Adele's teachings on devotion to the Immaculate Conception reported a special protection. In one community where dozens of children died, the families who had consecrated their homes to Mary's protection did not lose a single child. The local doctor, Dr. Harrison, initially a skeptic, remarked after investigating the cases, "There is more in heaven and on earth than our science dreams of." Meanwhile, the small wooden chapel was replaced by a larger shrine, built with donations from the faithful and the voluntary labor of local men. With each stone laid, stories of grace received were shared. "My daughter Sarah hadn't spoken since she was 3, said Emma Thompson as she carried water for the workers. "After we prayed a novena here, she woke up singing a song to Our Lady that she had never heard before." Adele, in her humility, never took credit for the miracles. "I am nothing but a small brush in the hands of the great artist," she would say, her eyes shining with devotion. Her simple life stood in stark contrast to the spiritual magnitude of her mission. She slept only a few hours a night, always on a mat on the floor, reserving the limited comfort of the chapel for sick pilgrims in need of help. The shrine's fame grew even more during a devastating drought in 1874, which threatened to destroy all the crops in the region. Adele organized a 9-day procession around the parched fields. On the final day of the novena, as the sky remained relentlessly blue and cloudless, she knelt in the center of the most affected field and raised a small image of the Immaculate Conception toward heaven. Witnesses reported that, as she prayed, a single cloud began to form above the field, growing quickly until it covered the entire area, pouring down a generous rain that saved the harvests. Despite her growing reputation, Adele remained faithful to her original mission, to teach children the path to salvation. Her teaching style was simple, yet profound. She used nature as her main tool. Each flower symbolized a virtue, each bird a lesson about divine providence. "Look how the squirrels store nuts for winter," she told the children. "In the same way, we must store the truths of faith in our hearts for times of darkness." Boom! As the years passed, Adele Brise's body grew weaker, but her spirit burned even more brightly. By the 1890s, her hair was as white as snow and her hands trembled with age, yet she continued to teach. When she could no longer walk long distances, the children came to her, sitting in a circle at her feet, soaking in her words like dry earth absorbs the rain. "I'm growing old like the trees in the forest," she would say with a serene smile. "But like them, I hope my roots will continue to nourish new life long after I am gone." It was a prophecy that would come true in ways she could never have imagined. On a cold July morning in 1896, Adele Brise passed away peacefully in her small room next to the chapel. According to her companions, at the moment of her passing, the scent of roses filled the room, and the chapel bell rang by itself, though no one had touched it. Her body was laid to rest in a simple grave on the sanctuary grounds, marked only by a wooden cross and regularly adorned with wildflowers brought by those whose lives she had touched. But the story didn't end with her death. The site of the apparitions, known as the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, now the Shrine of Our Lady of Champion, continued to draw pilgrims. The graces attributed to the intercession of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception multiplied over the following decades. In 1902, during a diphtheria outbreak that was devastating entire communities, Marie Duchamp brought her 5-year-old son, already given up by doctors, to the shrine. After a night of vigil beside Adele's grave, the boy, who had been burning with fever and struggling to breathe, awoke completely healed. Dr. Williams, a Protestant physician who had been following the case, documented it as a recovery beyond any known medical explanation. The Great Depression of 1929 brought immense hardship to the entire country. The small shrine, by then run by a community of sisters inspired by Adele's example, became a place of refuge for the desperate. A soup kitchen was run daily, feeding hundreds of people. "We never knew where the next day's food would come from," wrote Sister Elizabeth, then in charge of the kitchen, in her diary. "But without fail, when our supplies ran out, someone would knock on the door with donations, sometimes from hundreds of miles away, saying they felt inexplicably compelled to bring food." In 1942, during World War II, a Polish-American family who had escaped occupied Europe made a pilgrimage of thanksgiving to the shrine. They brought with them a rosary made of breadcrumbs, secretly crafted in a concentration camp. "Our grandmother prayed this rosary every night," said the eldest son, Joseph. "The night before our planned escape, she dreamt of a woman dressed in white, pointing the way through the forest. We followed that exact path, and somehow no guard saw us." Devotion to Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception continued to grow across the country. Meanwhile, the modest shrine in Wisconsin remained a hidden treasure of American faith, preserving the simplicity and authenticity that had defined Adele's life. The sisters who cared for the grounds carried on her legacy, teaching catechism to local children and welcoming pilgrims with the same warm hospitality. In 1954, when construction began on the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., a small amount of soil from the apparition site in Wisconsin was added to its foundation, a symbolic link between the grandeur of the National Basilica and the humility of America's first approved Marian apparition site. Karen Miller, a young nurse from Minnesota, visited the shrine in 1987, seeking direction in her life. Spiritually lost, she sat alone in the small chapel at dusk. "I felt a presence I can't describe," she later recalled. "I didn't see anything with my eyes, but I felt a maternal embrace and heard an inner voice that said, 'Care for my children.'" Karen would go on to found a free clinic for underprivileged children, serving thousands of young lives over the following decades. For years, the shrine remained a quiet treasure, known mostly to local devotees. That changed dramatically on December 8, 2010, when Bishop David Ricken, after a thorough investigation, officially declared the apparitions experienced by Adele Brise to be authentic. It became the first and only Marian apparition site in the United States to receive church approval. News spread rapidly throughout the country and beyond, bringing a new wave of pilgrims to the shrine. Among them was Michael Santos, a New York firefighter who had survived the 9/11 attacks. "During those terrible hours, when I was trapped in the rubble, I saw a light that took the form of a woman," he said, through tears after visiting the shrine. "She showed me the way out. I never told anyone, until I saw a picture of Our Lady as she appeared to Adele. It was her, exactly as I saw her that day." The ancient oak tree near which the Virgin appeared to Adele still stands at the heart of the shrine grounds, its deep roots and mighty trunk a symbol of the enduring strength of the faith planted there. A spring of clear water discovered shortly after the apparitions still flows continuously, even during the harshest droughts, a symbol of the divine grace that never ceases. On autumn mornings, as golden leaves gently fall onto the path Adele once walked, many visitors report sensing an inexplicable fragrance of roses. And at night, when the moonlight bathes the shrine, the silence feels thick with presence, as though the veil between heaven and earth is thinner in that sacred place. The legacy of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception and her messenger, Adele Brise, continues to blossom, not only through documented physical healings, but through the countless spiritual transformations that take place every day. One anonymous visitor left a note in the intentions book that perfectly captures the feeling of many. "I came here carrying a weight that was crushing me. I leave as light as the leaves dancing in the wind." Thank you, Mother, for this refuge of hope. And so, in a quiet corner of Wisconsin, among forests that once witnessed the birth of a nation, a light still shines, one that transcends generations, a beacon of faith, hope, and maternal love that continues to guide souls to this very day. Just as the Queen of Heaven promised that humble Belgian immigrant, "Go and do not be afraid. I will help you." Then, in every child who learns to make the sign of the cross, in every person who finds comfort in times of despair, in every heart that opens to divine love, the miracle that began on that October morning in 1859 continues to ripple outward like waves across a lake, expanding endlessly through time and space, touching lives in ways that only eternity will fully reveal. Prayer. O most holy Mary, Immaculate Conception, Queen of heaven and earth, conceived without the stain of original sin, we lift our hearts to you, full of hope and devotion. You who appeared with heavenly splendor in the forests of Wisconsin, bringing comfort and mission to humble Adele, look upon us too with your motherly love. In your immaculate light, we find refuge. In your pure hands, we place our concerns. Beneath your heavenly mantle, we seek protection. O Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, who continually intercedes for the conversion of sinners, help us to live in the grace of your Son, Jesus. Like the morning dew that refreshes the earth, pour upon us the blessings of heaven. May we, like you, say yes to the divine will at every moment of our lives, strengthen our faith in times of trial, renew our hope when discouragement threatens, increase our love when our hearts grow weary. You who are a source of miracles and consolation for all who seek you with sincerity, do not abandon your children in their time of need. May the scent of roses that accompanies your holy presence also fill our souls with virtues pleasing to God. O most pure Mother, teach us the path of holiness, guide our steps toward heaven, and at the end of our earthly journey, present us to your Son, Jesus. Amen. The story of the Immaculate Conception and her miracles reminds us that faith truly can move mountains. In the forests of Wisconsin, a young immigrant woman was chosen for a divine mission, one that continues to transform lives nearly 2 centuries later. Through her humility, Adele Brise teaches us that we don't need titles or wealth to do God's work, only an open heart and a willingness to serve. When Our Lady appeared and said, "Go and do not be afraid. I will help you," she wasn't speaking to Adele alone. She was speaking to each one of us who, when facing the challenges of life, hesitate to take the next step. How many times have we felt too small for the task ahead? How often have we doubted our ability to make a difference? The shrine of Champion, with its ancient oak and ever-flowing spring, remains a living testimony that heaven is closer than we think. There, where the extraordinary touch the ordinary, divine grace continues to flow, healing, comforting, and renewing. May we too, like the pilgrims who walk that sacred ground, catch the scent of roses on our own spiritual journey and recognize the small miracles that happen every day. Journey of the Saints, Sacred Stories invites you to be part of this community that keeps the inspiring stories of faith alive through the centuries. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our heartfelt narratives that uplift the soul and strengthen the heart. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and don't forget to leave a like to let us know that these stories still matter today. And now we ask you, when was a moment in your life when you felt Our Lady's special protection? Share your experience with the Mother of Jesus in the comments below. Before you go, watch the video up above, chosen especially for you, to continue this journey of faith and inspiration.